Quick walk around of the desert bikes. In the front is a 2019 CRF450X, and behind it is the 2005 model. Over the years we've done a lot of riding on these, and the setup has pretty much coalesced to be the same across all the bikes. The 2005 I've had for the better part of a decade, and the 2019 is a fresh build off a retired race bike. Other bike builds, on the left is a 2005 XR650R, and then on the right here is a 2019 450RX. And you'll see pretty much the same mods across all of these bikes. Anybody that's spent any kind of time on a motorcycle away from a track is going to realize pretty quick that fuel is the limitation. Here's somebody pre-running in Baja with 2 gallons of gas strapped to their waist. The manufacturers target about 70 miles, and even with a desert tank, you're really realistically only talking 100-150 miles. And then you get to cut that in half if you're going to do a down and back. And that's why you'll see places like this if you look hard enough. This is somebody's fuel stop. It's like a 55-gallon drum full of fuel hidden in the middle of the desert. And if it's race fuel, that's what, $10 a gallon? So that's big money in Baja right there. Liquid gold. So that's pretty much why every bike I own is going to have a desert tank. You think 50 miles is a lot, but at say 50 miles an hour, right? That's only an hour out, hour back. That's not enough. And it's definitely not enough for an adventure bike. The next thing to consider is speed. And I don't mean top speed like this run we did with the XR650R, easily 100 miles an hour. What I mean is the average speed for the trip. That's going to set your gearing. That's going to determine your fuel plan. Generally, we're just cruising. Trying to cover ground, doing recon, pre-running, not necessarily pushing it hard. On average, we plan for about 25 miles an hour and about 150 miles of fuel range. On the older bikes, we like to bump up the gearing about 20%. So on the 05, the stock gearing is 1351. I'm running 1442. That's high. It just keeps the RPMs down for the older bikes that don't have the RPM range that the new bikes do. I think the red line on the 2019 bikes is something like 11,000 RPM. So if you're running 5,000 down the road for 20-30 minutes, it's no problem. Sounds like a lot for the XR650R, but that thing has so much power, it's not even funny. Here's my main man Ben just tractoring up this hill, just clutching it, working the clutch. For this bike, no problem at all. For comparison, here's me coming up a similar hill on the RX, and you could tell it's revving higher and it's super punchy. It's kind of a little bit too hard to control for stuff like this. Yep, you gotta work for that traction. But in the whoops, these bikes are so fun. So fun. In the XR, just tractors through the whoops. Very different, very capable. Speaking of traction, we always used to run Maxxis Desert IT tires because cactus and rocks, they're just a really nice hard compound that would stand up in the desert. But the bib mooses, aside from the cost, are changing the game. You could put a nice soft tire on to get traction and still not have to worry about flats. It's always a trade-off. You could see these rims are absolutely mangled from running these soft tires in the desert. If you hit a rock at 50, you're gonna ruin the rim. It's easy to say don't hit them, but they're there and you're gonna hit them. All the hero stuff makes for good footage, but some of my favorite riding is just taking it slow, on these big hills. And here, the XR is kind of like the inverse of a trials bike. It's big, it's heavy, it's tall, it has a lot of power. And it's a real challenge to keep it upright on some of these hills. And just like all bikes, as soon as you take your foot off the pegs, you lose traction. So it's a really good bike to practice on. It's especially fun to practice the slow man drills on these. Just trying to go as slow as I can. And one of the challenges of having so many bikes is the controls are inevitably going to be different. And here I missed the brake pedal and had to spike the front brake, and it just slid out. And let's be honest, this is what killed the XR right here. Find a level spot, kick it over, get going again. Still a fun bike though. Alright, on the bars, I like to run the aluminum buttons, start and stop. On here, there's a high-low switch, which just for this cheapy light. There's a tether switch, just because this is kind of my loaner bike at this point. And it's a good thing to have. The vapor. I love the vapor. I absolutely love the vapor because it has engine temp. So all these bikes have desert radiators and some of them have fans. We'll get into that, but the vapor is the only one that has the temperature on it. Same thing on the new X, billet buttons. Here we're running the Cycra Bark Busters and no vapor because it has the factory display, which you don't need, come to find out after looking at the wiring diagram. So maybe we'll switch that out, we'll see. Here we're looking at a dual GPS setup on a stainless bracket for kind of more rally stuff. One of the sacrifices on this particular bike with that stainless mount is I had to move the dash and had to take the steering damper off, but we normally run them. Seat, I don't really think they're super important, but grippier the better. And in terms of engine mods, I don't really personally think that's important. As you can see, these bikes have plenty of power and traction is really the problem. The other thing you'll see on all these bikes is different controls. Levers, pegs, pedals, they all get swapped out. Not necessarily for any particular name brand, but ones that I like the fit and feel of, and they're all ground so that they don't catch or punch holes in the case. Engine temperature is a big deal on these bikes. I'm not one to argue, but you can tell that when they get hot, they start to pop. The computer must lean them out, and they don't even run right. You have to stay cool, and if anybody tries to argue that a 450 doesn't need a fan, they're either on the track, they're always moving, or they're just not looking at it. One of the challenges of putting fans on these bikes is inevitably, like we talked about, you're going to have a desert tank. On this bike we had the Works Connection radiator braces, and none of it fits with these kits. So again, this is the before the fan, mounting the fan to the factory radiator, routing a hole in the radiator brace, and then putting the shroud back on. And this is all in the pursuit to get good fitment. If there's ever a reason to buy radiators or replace one like I had to on this bike, I just go out and get custom oversized radiators. For example, we ran the factory radiators on the RX, but again, every bike that I have now has these radiators on it. Just they go. If you run the factory ones, then run the braces. Otherwise, have them brace the custom ones. But I personally wouldn't run out and get these radiators just to do it. I would put a fan on if you're having cooling issues. Another thing that I like to do is put this reflective tape on. I personally like the black tactical look, but black is the same color as the road. And if you're just splayed out on the road, nobody's going to see you. So, my opinion, brighter the better. The final thing to touch on is lights. I think it's so important to have good lights. These Baja Designs lights are pretty expensive, but they are nice. When you mount them, I'm showing here, when you mount them, they have these cooling fins on the back that people forget that you're just raking all your cables and wires. So you need to take special care when you mount it so that when you turn the handlebars, it's not just scraping on those wires. Big failure mode on these. Given the choice, I'll run the Squdron Pro. For example, the RX could handle it, but the XR650 has an updated stator and basically a completely standalone system for that light. As you can see, there's a bunch of different housings, whether they're clamp-on or bolt-on, but normally I buy the plastic shrouds and then they get swapped out for every race. That way you can hang them on the wall. This particular one was from the Nevada 200. That housing on the 05 is a cheapy copy of an L because it's going to get gutted for the Squdron Pro and S2 kit from Baja Designs. Alright, that's enough yakking. Let's get out there. I don't think there's any one bike that's going to do it all. Here's a track bike in the middle of the dunes. Worked fine. It was a pain in the ass to start, but ultimately it lasted the weekend and it was great. Didn't have anything fancy, no radiator fan, no dials. By the time you got to the top of that hill, you'd started to smell it stink from being so hot. But you do what you do. Get out there. Make it happen. It's easy. Meet your heroes. See you there.